Hi everyone and welcome to Right Design for Communication, a series of digital productions from Deaf Scotland showcasing a future vision where the design of the world around us has hearing impaired people in mind, as well as others living with sensory loss and disabilities. The format of these productions will include a presentation from our guest, followed by a short Q&A. Next in the series, we would like to welcome Kevin White, Head of Digital Accessibility for Scottish Government. He has worked for nearly 30 years in the public and private sector in a variety of senior design and technical roles. His skills and knowledge help to ensure that digital services do not introduce barriers to disabled people through poor implementation. He organises Accessibility Scotland, an annual conference to help build understanding, awareness and knowledge of the challenges and opportunities the digital world presents for disabled people. Now, without further delay, I'd like to pass over to Kevin.
Great, thank you very much for that introduction. I forget how long I've actually been working in digital now and again. It's always nice to remind me just how mature I am. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today is about designing for digital inclusion and the process that we have within the Scottish Government and how we approach that and how we engage with people and how we think about it. So as Nick said, I am the head of digital accessibility within the Scottish Government. That sounds grand and that I've got a big team. We're quite a small specialist team, and the focus is on really trying to change culture and change the way we think about things within the Scottish Government to try and embed accessibility and inclusion in everything that we actually do. So I suppose when I started thinking about this, I was starting to think about, well, what is digital? Because we talk about digital design and digital services and so forth, and we think about these quite broadly. But so, I mean, effectively, we've got websites and mobile applications, and we've got tablets and desktops and so forth. But actually, when I started thinking about this, I kept coming up with more and more things, whether that's voice interfaces, and we've now got a lot of voice interfaces, really, really handy devices. Door locks and bells. My neighbour's got a digital door lock that kind of allows her to interact with people who are at her door in ways that better suit her. Light bulbs. I bought a light bulb for my son and annoy him endlessly by changing the colour of it, and that's all connected through Wi-Fi and a smartphone. A smart pet feeder, baby monitors, thermostats, fridges, health monitors. Cars are digitally connected, general logistics and the whole kind of logistics chain that we deal with things and how to get stuff to our front doors or to our shops. And agriculture is kind of more and more digital aspects to that as well. So digital is actually quite a huge consideration. And while we focus potentially on information that we provide to citizens and services that citizens can request from the public sector, there are actually a huge range of other topics within that space. So we kind of have to think quite broadly when we're thinking of this stuff. So then I flipped it around and asked the question, well, what is inclusion? So inclusion comes from a number of different places. We think about inclusion in educational practice, and that was having integrated educational environments and ensuring children with disabilities are in the same space as everyone else, having an inclusive inclusive education environment. We also think about an inclusive work environment. We're treating everyone fairly, respectfully, providing equal opportunity and resources for everyone. That's a really, really important part, and I know that the equalities divide that exists for disabled people, employment is a big part of that. Ensuring that our workplaces are inclusive is a key component to that. In terms of digital, it's within both of these areas and beyond. It's about ensuring that all of these services that we're creating, whether it's applying to get your bins picked up or rubbish picked up on a certain day, or applying for a driver's license or TV license or whatever it happens to be, that those are inclusive, that we're not excluding people because of the way we design things. So we need to kind of take quite an active thought process in that. And so this is partly why we need to design. physical products, there's a kind of a defined process for how we go about designing. You'll kind of prototype products, you'll work them up into sort of small scale models, and you'll see which bit worked, you'll look at the technical aspects of it and the standards that are involved and all of that sort of stuff. And there will be stages and milestones and everything. And like, digital products and services shouldn't be any different to that. We should still be thinking in all the same ways. And in many cases we do prototyping. Well, actually, okay. So in some cases we do prototyping so that we're not actually, we're finding problems early in the process. We will test with people to check that it's going to work and so forth. Bad design, or where we're not doing that, the actual success, any success that happens, largely down to luck. I mean, because it's like we're not really engaging with users. We're not actually getting them in as part of the design process. So how do we know what we're doing is right for them? And that's kind of where I think design just comes down to, well, it's either guesswork, very, very intelligent people, or just luck. So I tend to veer on the side of, I like to get people involved in the design process. And that's certainly what we've tried to do within the Scottish Government's approach. Flipping that a little bit more, why do we need to design inclusively? Well, if we don't, then we are at risk of excluding people if their needs are not included in the design. Now that's really, really problematic for the public sector. We are providing services for all citizens in Scotland, and there's nowhere else for them to go. If you want to book a flight, not that we're allowed to book flights at the moment, but if you want to fly somewhere, heaven forbid, you can choose your carrier, you can choose who you buy your flights from. So you can kind of go, well, actually, this website, I don't like the website because I can't actually get through to the point where I can buy a ticket. You then walk away and go and find another website where they have paid more attention to people's needs, and you can actually buy a ticket, and it's relatively straightforward. So you've got choice. In the public sector, you don't have choice. There's only one place you're going to get a TV license. There's only one place you're going to be able to kind of engage with your council. So we have to make sure that what we are doing does not exclude people. So that's kind of the around about the why about it. We need to design inclusively as well, because multiple viewpoints improves the design of things. By understanding, excuse me, by understanding different people's perspectives, we can find things that will help everybody. Writing in straightforward, clear English is something that really helps everybody. It has a particular value for people who have some form of reading disability, but it helps everybody. Nobody's going to complain if the terms and conditions that you're reading are straightforward and simple. They're going to thank you for it. Well, maybe not thank you, don't get that effusive. I think the other thing around about designing inclusively, and this comes back to the kind of design process and my role as a designer, so to speak, is I am not all users. So I can make assumptions. There are things that I could bring to that, but I need to always be aware of that I have my own biases, I have my own likes, and what I want from a digital service and digital interface or a product. But I'm not everybody, and I need to be very conscious of that as a designer. So designing inclusively, bringing people into that process, takes that power away from me, which is a really important thing to do. So thinking about public sector services, and I kind of touched on this just briefly, roughly we have transactional services, which are people requesting something or providing something, whether it's information on tax or whatever, they provide something to the public sector. And then there's the informational, where we are providing information to citizens about services, about what's going on in the news, about what they're allowed to do, restrictions under COVID, or whatever it happens to be. So there's kind of two sides to this thing, and they all need to work for everybody. And I think COVID's highlighted that quite effectively. We saw early in the process, a lot of the information that was coming out maybe didn't take as much consideration for accessibility as we should have done, and we worked very, very hard, very, very quickly to try and change that and make sure we captured those areas where we were failing in that space. And I think we've done a relatively good job of trying to step up to that. Always open to criticism, though. The reason we do this in the public sector is we've got lots and lots of regulations and policies around about it. Well, actually, that's not the reason. I mean, for me, the reason is I think we've got moral duty to do it, but we have got a lot of regulations which help us kind of enforce that moral duty on ourselves. The most recent one is a thing called the Public Sector Bodies Accessibility Regulations. That kind of says what we have to do to make stuff digitally accessible and makes reference back to the guidelines which stipulate what that means. But we've also got the Equality Act from 2010, which, as I'm sure you're all aware, comes from a kind of bringing together of a lot of different diversity and discriminatory-based legislation, brought that all together. But we've also got, we're signatories to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and that has a lot of stuff within it as well, which is really interesting. We seldom go back to that one. Within the Scottish Government itself, we've also got a few policies which are looking to, I mean, either specifically or generally improve the accessibility and inclusion of either our workplace or Scotland in general. So things like the Recruitment Retention Plan for Disabled People, which was published a couple of years ago now, that's very much a case of, well, how do we make sure that we as an employer are inclusive and supportive of people who are coming to us who might have disabilities. Fair Scotland for Disabled People, slightly older bit of policy, but that kind of outlined lots of different steps and lots of different thoughts that were kind of around that principle of just making stuff more accessible. And then we've got a national performance framework, which kind of starts to capture how we're doing and those sorts of things. All of these are really dependent on us ensuring that we are creating services, providing information that is inclusive, so that we're not introducing barriers to people, and we need to actively think about that. So I've got a couple of examples just now about two services or two areas where we have actually started to think about, or we've started to think or approached it in an inclusive design way. One is the Independent Living Fund. So this provides grants to young disabled people transitioning from child services to adult services, and the goal was to have the application driven as much as possible by the young person. That was a key part to it. It was to try and get them to ensure that they were telling their story as part of the application. So we did a massive amount of research with disabled young people and their families to design the form and the process. And we got a lot of support from organizations to help us engage with young people and ensure that they were comfortable in taking part. And that was a key part, that was a key aspect of this for us. In order for us to be able to do this, we needed to adapt how we did things. We needed to be much more open about the methods that we were using, how we were doing that, and how we were engaging with people. So we did a lot of work to ensure that everybody was comfortable with what they were doing. And it took a little bit more time, but at the end of the day, what we got was a process which was built around the people who were applying, the young people who were in this process, who were kind of applying for the Independent Living Fund. Their needs were kind of at the core of everything that we did. Another slightly larger example of where we're trying to take a very strong inclusive design approach is within the Social Security Scotland work. So this is a large piece of change for Scottish Government, where we are designing a number of new services for delivery from Scottish Government to support benefits that have been devolved to Scotland. This is one of the core aspects of this, is it's built on dignity, fairness and respect. That's within the legislation that kind of enshrines this. In order to do that, you have to be inclusive. You have to be thinking inclusively, and you have to be working inclusively. So these are large transactional services, and in order to design those, we need to get people involved in that design process. And there's a large user-centered design team with within the Scottish Government, the Social Security Directorate, who are taking inclusive approaches to design. So one example is they're trying to work with co-design sessions. So this is the idea that we can go out and we can do research and we can understand people's needs, and then we can take it away and we can design something. But in actual fact, the next logical step is we kind of do a little bit of work, but then we bring it all back and we go, right, this is what we found out. Can we use this to now design something? So you work with same or similar audiences to actually design stuff. And that can be a really important part of taking an inclusive approach. And there's also work with there's a large experience panel and partner organizations to ensure that we're including people effectively within that process. I think within there, we're trying to check our work regularly. So doing a lot of user research with disabled people. We've got, there's a small team in there that does accessibility reviews, audits, testing to ensure that the services that we're producing are as accessible as we can make them. But we're also thinking internally. So there's a lot of support systems and services that need to be in place to allow staff within the Social Security Agency to deliver the benefits and support people who are receiving benefits and applying for benefits. We need to make sure all of those systems are accessible as well, so that our workplace is accessible. So we've got staff insight groups and a digital accessibility group who are trying hard to ensure that that's embedded within there. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about our approach to design and how we think about inclusion at different stages within that. So from a very high level and a very rough look, we've got kind of 4 project phases. So we have a discovery, which is very much about understanding the problem that we're looking to solve and who it affects. Then we have an alpha phase where we're exploring solutions to the problem. And that's where we start to build out prototypes and create things that we can kind of we can test with people. Beta is much more into creating the actual solution. So that's where you start getting more production quality materials being available for use. And then live is where we kind of continually check that things work, that we're not introducing new problems and so forth. Now, each of those phases, there are different things that you can do. There are different things that we need to do. And there are different challenges and constraints on stuff. So for example, we know that when we're creating prototypes in alpha, most prototypes don't function with assistive technology like screen readers. So it's very difficult to kind of engage with people who are screen reader users, sight impaired, and want and work with a prototype. We have to adapt to that because we still need their voice. We still need to understand what needs they have, but we know that we can't test with a screen reader. So that's kind of one aspect of that. Excuse me. So the other thing that we need to be considering when we're looking at all of these phases is that we should be building on an existing understanding. We know lots of stuff already. And this is one of the things that as Social Security started to kind of expand out and their research activities expanded out, there was a lot of stuff that they could build on from previous work. So we'd found out different needs that didn't change. So there's no point in going out to the audiences and asking the same question again. What we need to try and do is make sure we're learning from the stuff that we've already done, that we're building on that existing understanding. That can be quite hard because large projects with lots and lots of different teams require a lot of organization in order to be able to share that. And that's only within one part of the organization. When you then start looking at, I don't know, Marine Scotland or agriculture and rural and education, they're kind of, again, big organizations in themselves. And how do we kind of make sure that we're sharing the right information across all those organizations? That's quite a tough challenge. all of the projects that we do and all of those different phases, what we need to be able to do is do them all in collaboration with people. We shouldn't at any point be kind of going off and disappearing into whole, building something and then coming out and going ta-da. We need to be trying to do it more transparently in collaboration with people as much as possible, and with as many people as possible. The needs vary, and there are a wide variety of people with a wide variety of needs, so we need to try and collaborate as broadly as possible. Again, these have challenges just in terms of budgets and time scales and so forth, but we have to try and think about how we best achieve that. And then from an inclusive design perspective, we need to be able to, there's kind of a phrase which is designing with people in the room. Rooms in inverted commas at the moment, because we're obviously not allowed to be in rooms with other people. But this idea is we need to design in collaboration with people. We can't just do it in isolation. So they have to be in there with us whilst we are doing it. What we're trying to do really ultimately is understand the lived experience. Interestingly, we know a lot about digital accessibility because we've got international standards that have been developed in collaboration with a lot of different people. They've been poked and prodded for years. We're kind of fairly confident that they do a good job. But what they can't tell us is about what's the lived experience and how does that lived experience layer onto the service that we're creating. Where do those things, or where would one cause a problem for the other, and how do we design again to avoid that? And ultimately, we're looking to help share understanding so that we can create better services going forward. So in terms of design, we've got a number of different approaches to design and a number of different challenges to think about whilst we are designing. There are lots of different design activities or methods. So we can do interviews, focus groups, card sorting, workshops, usability testing, observation, pens and power, sense making, co-design. All of these, they're all about trying to communicate with people, but they all have different ways of doing that, and they all might involve different artifacts, so different materials, whether that's post-it notes or a prototype on a computer or a letter that we're looking to kind of look at the language being used. All of those different activities have features that we need to consider. And then there are broader features around about that. So if we are doing usability testing and there is an element where we need someone in a particular place, there are travel considerations within that we need to think about in order to make that inclusive. We also need to think about how we are communicating with people. Do we need interpreters there to ensure that a BSL user is able to fully articulate their concerns or thoughts or ideas to the non-BSL using researcher? How do we make sure that we can facilitate that in a working way? And then, as I said, we're working with visual things, whether that's a prototype, and then we're just working with things in general, whether that's post-it notes or whatever. So there's a lot of features of the design that we need to question and poke at as we are doing our designing our design activities, if you like. So, and then we poke with lots more questions. I mean, are participant needs at the heart of the activities they're going to be asked to do? So how do we kind of find that out? And we've got ways to do that. We will try and send out a form to any research participants just going, this is what we're going to be doing. Is there anything we can do to make it easier for you to participate? So we've got ways that we can kind of try and poke and prod around that. We also want to be able to offer more choice where one method does not support all participants. So whilst we might be doing usability testing with a prototype, that won't work for someone who's a screen reader. So what we might do is actually just do an interview with someone who's a screen reader user and talk them through what it looks like. So almost the researcher is acting like the screen reader. And that's actually quite helpful because it starts that early discussion, so we can kind of we can get people, screen reader users' thoughts on the whole flow of the process. And again, when we start getting back to space, well, actually, we've got different spaces for research, whether that's a digital space through Teams or Zoom or WebEx or wherever, or a physical space, whether that's kind of our usability lab or another public space. How convenient is enjoyable for everybody to use and take part of? Is the space accessible? Does it work for people? So we need to be thinking about these things when we're designing stuff. So I've got another bit of an example, last one, which is just around some work that we did around an accessibility statement. So the new regulations that we've got require public sector sites to have an accessibility statement. They come in a particular format, and I had a question as to whether or not the format best supported user needs. So was it doing what it needed to do? It certainly did it for the regulators because it had all the information in it, but did it do anything for people, disabled people, and did it kind of meet their needs? So we put together just a program of research and worked with a wide variety of organizations to kind of deliver this. We ran some initial groups based on what I've termed here digital accessibility groups. When I talk about digital accessibility, we kind of the focus tends to be on 4 rough groups, and I absolutely acknowledge that these are very, very kind of roughly thrown together groups, and the needs even within those groups are widely varied, and that's for something for us to understand and research. But the groups are there for I suppose for ease of communication and kind of starting to think about how we're approaching things. But basically we have sight impairment, hearing impairment and deaf, mobility, particularly upper limb mobility, and then cognitive. So those are 4 very rough groups that we know will have challenges with poor accessibility in digital services. So we kind of think in those terms. But what we did initially was we focused on those groups and we worked together with them, and we tried to work with the support of the organizations that were supporting us in doing this to actually design our research. So we kind of said, right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to be using post-it notes. We're going to do this. We're going to have a discussion, whatever it was going to be. And then we kind of shared that out and just got some opportunity to actually improve and address the needs of the group that the support organization knew. So they helped us change our materials. For most of the work, we also had a scribe for each working table. So we kind of made sure that there was a lot more support and that nobody was having to kind of write lots of stuff down. That's what the scribe's job was. And we obviously provided interpreters where we were working with BSL user group. And then we also considered the space and how we had laid it out and ensuring that there was appropriate wheelchair access and space around about the working space. And also even things like not putting post-it notes up on the walls, we kind of shifted everything to just be on the desk. And again, just making it all more considered. At the end of this, and I know I've kind of put this near the start, we actually ran a sense making with everybody in it. And that was a fantastic challenge. And I'm not saying we got it right, but we did learn a huge amount in terms of actually if we have a completely wide variety, huge variety of people involved, and there are lots of different overlapping needs, how do we work that? And we did. And a lot of it, again, was coming back to sharing early what we were doing and being clear and open and willing to kind of learn from the support organizations and the participants. So this is some of the things that we did learn. Preparation is everything. We worked a lot to kind of prepare what we were doing and shared that with everybody involved and took feedback and changed. And we kind of, we did some work ensuring the venue was accessible. We've got a couple of checklists which we'll go through and we'll assess a venue and ensure that we're selecting the right venues. We also provide accessible materials. We make sure that we go through the Word documents that we're using and ensure that we're following good practice and making them fully accessible. We also kind of needed to factor in a lot more time to listen within the sessions themselves. There's a lot to unpick in terms of that lived experience and It also we need to make sure that we're providing enough space for people to digest the information, for us to potentially kind of go through it again, and also for us just to take that time to listen to that whole experience. And the kind of flip of that is really about being open to learning and taking an open-minded approach to both the criticism that we get on the methods that we use, absolutely fine, and that really helps us improve those, and also just learning about people's view on the services that we can develop and how we might go about doing that. And then there's last couple of things are kind of more administrative things in terms of how we approach stuff. We always need more time to recruit people, because it does take more time just to make sure everything's in place. And there's usually, we need to budget for additional costs to ensure that people can participate effectively. So, in summary of everything that I've spoken about, my views and the view of Scottish Government in general is that inclusive design, digital design, is essential in the public sector. We are providing services for everybody in Scotland. We need to make sure that everybody in Scotland can use those services, and we don't create barriers for people. Our design activities and how we go about understanding what we're doing and what we are creating, they need to be more inclusive. We need to always be thinking, right, how do I make sure I can bring someone who is a BSL user into the space, someone who is blind into this space, someone who is a wheelchair user in the space? How do I make sure my design activities can include them, and actively doing that? We also need to co-design how we are conducting our research. We need to have more people involved in that process. We can't just disappear off into a wee room and come out with our ta-da moment. And I think finally, we're always learning more. We don't necessarily always get it right in terms of how we're kind of designing and researching stuff, but we're always learning on how to do it better, and always open to learning how to do it better. And I think the challenge with that one as well is better. It might be better for some, it isn't better for everyone. So there's always, we kind of learn all of these different things, and then sometimes you get to the point where you go, well, if I do this, it's not going to work there. So that's when we start to actually go, okay, well, we need to break apart and do different methods and approach things in different ways for different audiences. So again, the learning kind of drives how we're changing things. So before I finish, I have a couple of questions for you, the audience. And this is about improving inclusion and how we kind of go about inclusion. And I suppose that first question is on that feedback and learning, and how we might change how we run research. How do we do research activities? You may or may not have been involved in research activities. If you have, great. How would we make it better? What would make it easier for you to be involved in that research, and how can we improve that? And I think, okay, so the second question is, what can we do to make it easier for people to be involved in research? This isn't so much about how to improve the sessions, but how just to get more people involved. This is around about recruiting participants. How do we better recruit participants? This is a challenge that we've faced in ensuring that we get more interest, engagement, and involvement from disabled people across Scotland to basically make our stuff better. So thank you very much. I've left my email there. Feel free to drop me an email if any of these things interest you, or if you can answer any of my questions.
Thank you, Kevin. We're now moving on to the Q&A portion of the showcase. So the first question we have is, bridging the equality gap is a priority for Deaf Scotland. What do you think are the three most important things for accessible information for those affected by deafness and or with sensory barriers?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose I'm going to answer this in a bit more of a convoluted way. I think there's two sides to this. I think there's one side which is the practical, how do we provide accessible information? I think the flip side, or the other side of it, is how do we build a culture that does this by default? So in terms of what are the important things to do, so if I were looking at accessibility in terms of information, using clear, straightforward language. There's a big drive towards plain English and crystal clear marks and all of those sorts of things. But basically, it's about using clear, simple, straightforward language. And by that, I don't mean kind of toned down or anything like that. It's really just about writing for your audience and not writing for some perceived kind of great convoluted language god that we might love. I think the other thing is, and these are again more practical, I think we're seeing much more use of video and audio content. And I think we need to be thinking about how we're doing that, how we are making and using those contents. They are great. There's a lot of good things about video and audio content that can help many people in terms of accessing information, but it also creates barriers. We need to be very conscious of those barriers and very aware of how do we ensure we're not kind of falling into the trap of creating those barriers. And similarly, we've got a huge use of charts and infographics, and I think we need to be thinking about how do we use those. Generally, images, how are we kind of improving how we present images, how we ensure that they're available for people regardless of the assistive technology that we use. The other side, I think, is this: how do we kind of build a culture that kind of makes things accessible by default? And I think there's a big challenge within that. I think it starts with education and training. I don't think we've got the right approach to ensuring that accessibility is taught and assessed from an early stage in all of our design and developer professionals. So there's more that we could do, I think, to make that much more embedded as part of good professional discipline. I think the analogy I would use is an architect wouldn't get away with building a building without making provision for wheelchair users. That's just ludicrous thinking. Why are we doing that when we're creating websites and digital technologies? We're still quite immature in that one. I think enforcement is another part of that. I'm not necessarily a big fan of like naming and shaming or fines or anything, that sort of thing, but I am kind of keen to see how we can enforce things more effectively and ensure that certainly within the public sector that we are able to kind of go to somebody like, that's inaccessible, can't go live, we can't do that. And that includes working with kind of partner organizations. A lot of our work is supplier led, so we need to think about, well, how do we enforce our standards with that supplier community? That's a big challenge. There's a big conversation within the supplier community, within the public sector itself, to deal with that. And I think kind of the outward facing side of things is it's get better at complaining about this stuff. So one of the things within the accessibility statement is that we now have to provide for all public sector services is that there needs to be a way to contact the service provider. If it's not accessible, throw something in. I mean, the more that we get that kind of says, well, actually, I was trying to use the site and I couldn't do that, and that's kind of useful. It starts to drive the change because we're actually seeing that people do need that. I appreciate that that's a huge challenge because people have been complaining for a long time about this stuff, and it's very hard to keep complaining when you don't necessarily see the change. But it does help slowly drive the agenda in that space.
And so you were touching on it there, mentioning the kind of the various digital content formats. But have you any tips or hints about online accessibility and inclusive communication practices?
Ooh, this is a nice broad question, so I'm going to answer it nice and broadly as well. I think so. There's probably two simple ones that I would suggest. Maybe three, but we'll stick with two for the moment. So I think the first thing to think about, and this is something that we forget, is the platform that you're using to manage your content. We create our content using content management systems, and that gets published. How accessible is that tool itself is one question I would always have. And does that tool help you make your content more accessible? So if you're managing a website, does it help make your website accessible? That's, I think, a big one, because it's all too easy to use a service which makes it really easy to manage a website, but actually what's underneath the hood makes it really hard for people to engage with that website if they're using assistive technology particularly. I think the other thing I would say, and this is more of a broader kind of hint and tip, in as much as I'm suggesting go and find the hints and tips that are already available on the web. So make use of the resources that are already available. I kind of do create a lot of guidance for our internal consumption and trying to ensure that our internal systems are accessible. And I joke that basically I'm just plagiarizing everything that's already there and putting a saltire on it. But all the information is there. There's loads out there. And I definitely make use of that. So the Web Accessibility Initiative within the W3C, they have a huge amount of resources on how to make stuff accessible. And that starts from very, very sort of easy introductions to web accessibility and kind of all the way through to the full-on standard, which I wouldn't suggest you start by reading. Start with the easy introduction stuff. There's a website called WebAIM. They provide a lot of information on how to make stuff accessible. Really, really good. The Government Digital Service, they've got materials on a lot more on how to kind of test for accessibility and kind of design accessible. So that's much more for practitioners than content owners. But yeah, those are the sort of things I would say.
Now, looking at your own employer, how do you think Scottish Government will be engaging and consulting with citizens in 10 years' time?
10 years, future looking. I'm never good with a crystal ball. Okay, so I suppose, so I think we're already started on that path. I think there's going to be more online consultation going on in a wide array of formats. We've already seen that happening. We've had to basically go, well, we can't do face-to-face. And the first question we had within the research community was, well, how are we going to engage with people? We still need to make sure their voice can be heard in the design process. So there's been a big shift in that. I think that will cement itself. I think we'll get a lot more of that. Scotland in particular, we've got a diverse geography and a lot of difficulties in getting access to these to sort of more out of the way places, but we still have to provide services to people in these places. So how do we make sure they're part of that? We can make cost-effective or have cost-effective research approaches using online consulting tools. I think the other thing I'd love to see is much more collaboration. So much more about getting citizens in the room and getting people in there with us trying to design these things. I think that's something that's, again, it's more of a culture shift than any technology shift. But I think there's, again, we're seeing a lot of that. And I think we'll see a lot more. And I suppose if I was being kind of a bit off the wall, I'd love to see something more in virtual environments. So whether that's, I don't know, Animal Crossing or whatever it happens to be, it's actually starting to reach out into different spaces and virtual spaces and looking at opportunities to kind of engage with people in these sorts of environments. That would be fascinating.
No, that would be really interesting. Taking part in some Scottish Government consultations, for sure. We're coming to our final question, and it is, how do you see the role of AI developing with regards to digital accessibility?
Ooh. So I think there's a couple of parts to this. So I think from a kind of creator side of things, I think improved AI will improve our ability to test at scale. So there are a lot of automated testing, accessibility testing platforms. They're very good, but they're not comprehensive. So they don't test all of the things that you can test. And where they are testing sort of a variety of stuff, they might have some gaps. So I think we'll see improvements in that as a result of machine learning and just improved AI in there. I think the other thing where we've started to see some of is the automatic generation of alternative content. So a good example of that is Twitter did a big piece about, or have done a lot on looking at generating alternative text for images using AI. So image recognition, and then kind of looking at context of the image and then trying to create alternative text for that. I think we'll see that improving. Another example is captions, automatically generated captions. We know they have problems because they're not precise enough, and we certainly can't use them for automatically translating things like policy, because it's just not, it's not precise enough. Even if it's 99% accurate, that's not enough. But that will improve as the statistical models just keep improving. I think within that, and it might be controversial and it's certainly a difficult one to look at, but I could see somebody looking into things like an AI avatar driven BSL user and translator. I know there's been some work on looking at sort of, this was more ASL, so American Sign Language, looking at gloves which kind of translated ASL. That obviously misses out the facial expression and the body language that's inherent within sign language. So it's not really a kind of a full translation, but I could see maybe somebody looking at an avatar type approach and seeing if that works. And I think the last thing really is better personalization. So we present up content now and it's, you get what you're given type stuff. We have got some options within the browsers to change the magnification. Some browsers allow you to change the color scheme. There's things like dark mode. I think what we could see is more AI driven changes to content. So for example, could you get something that could translate a piece of content into an easy read document? That would be amazing. It would be exceedingly difficult because I know translating to easy read is an art, and a difficult one at that. But stuff like that I could see being of value again.
Yeah, but I really do. I think it throws up kind of really exciting possibilities for people.
Sure, yeah.
In the future. But that brings us to the end of the Q&A, so it just leaves me to give my thanks to you, Kevin, for delivering the enlightening presentation and answering those questions. To our audience, I hope it has provided some insight and takeaways to bring to your own stakeholders or the people that you work with, and those that are watching today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nick. Take care.